I want you to think, just for a second, about the environmental footprint you are leaving right now. Like today.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the choices you make on a daily or even hourly basis. You probably sort your recycling.
Right, yeah.
Maybe you've agonized over whether to buy an electric car or just stick with, like, a highly efficient hybrid.
Oh, absolutely. We all do that math.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You think about the energy efficiency of your appliances,
Hmm.
the packaging on your groceries, where your clothes come from. I mean, we spend so much of our waking lives just trying to tread lightly on the earth.
Yeah, trying to minimize that negative impact.
Right. We calculate carbon offsets for our flights. We install solar panels. We compost. But here is the question that really stopped me in my tracks today as I was preparing for this discussion.
Okay, what is it?
I want you to consider what happens to that carefully managed, lifelong ecological ledger after you are gone.
Yeah, that is the big one.
It is. It really is.
Because we spend decades, I mean literally decades, meticulously managing our environmental impact, tracking every plastic bottle, every gallon of gas, only to completely abandon the math at the very end.
It's so true.
The material we are analyzing today, it really forces us to look at this massive blind spot in the modern sustainability movement.
Yeah, which is why we are going to examine the rapidly growing green burial movement today, relying on a really comprehensive overview that details not just the mechanics of this alternative, but the whole philosophy behind it.
Right. And what becomes clear very quickly is that this goes way beyond simply, choosing a biodegradable box.
Definitely.
We're looking at a fundamental shift in the human relationship with nature, like a rewriting of community rituals and a total reevaluation of how modern society interacts with mortality.
So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to really unpack this shift, to understand the history of how we got so disconnected from the natural cycle of death,
Mm-hmm.
and to explore the honestly surprising economics, technology, and psychology driving people back to the earth. It really is surprising.
It is. But to truly grasp the magnitude of the green burial movement, we have to start by thoroughly examining the modern baseline that it's reacting against.
Yeah, we have to look at what we're doing now.
Right. And when you look plainly at what constitutes a conventional burial practice today, it is genuinely shocking.
It's intense.
I mean, we are talking about injecting bodies with embalming chemicals, primarily formaldehyde.
Right.
We are talking about placing those bodies in heavy steel or copper caskets, and then placing those metal caskets inside massive reinforced concrete vaults in the ground.
It's a lot of material.
That's an absurd amount.
Yeah.
When you layer all of those elements together, a traditional burial is essentially planting a toxic time capsule in the earth that is guaranteed to slowly leak.
A toxic time capsule. That is exactly what it is. Because if we look at the chemistry and the physics of that capsule, the environmental stakes become incredibly clear.
Right.
The entire intention behind a metal casket, a concrete vault, and chemical embalming is preservation.
To stop nature, basically. Exactly. It is a concerted industrial attempt to freeze biological time and hold off the natural, inevitable processes of decay.
Which is wild when you think about it.
It is. Embalming fluid, for instance, works by cross-linking proteins in cellular tissue. It essentially creates this lattice that temporarily prevents naturally occurring bacteria from breaking down the body.
Okay, but you said temporarily.
Yes, exactly. Because it is only temporary. The Earth is a highly corrosive environment,
Right, nature always wins.
Always. Concrete cracks under the pressure of frost heaves and ground settling. Steel rusts and compromises when it's exposed to subsurface moisture.
Wow.
And over time, water permeates those barriers. And when it does, those embalming fluids, which, by the way, contain known human carcinogens, they get flushed out.
Oh, man. And they just go straight into the ground?
Right into the surrounding soil. And they can eventually reach the local groundwater.
That's terrifying.
We are actively introducing heavy metals from the casket hardware and toxic preservatives right into local ecosystems. It completely disrupts the biological health of the soil.
I mean, I understand the emotional desire to preserve a loved one, but from an environmental perspective, this makes zero sense.
None at all.
Why did we ever default to these intense, chemical-heavy preservation methods if they are so fundamentally disruptive to the very ground we're placing them in?
It's a great question.
It just seems bizarre that we decided to go to war with nature at the exact moment we were supposed to be returning to it.
Yeah.
I mean, this couldn't have been the standard practice for the majority of human history, right?
No, it wasn't. Not at all. The shift toward conventional, chemical-heavy burial is a surprisingly modern phenomenon.
Really? How modern?
Well, it was born out of logistical necessity, not public health or environmental science.
Yeah.
If we trace the widespread adoption of arterial embalming in the United States, it leads directly back to the Civil War.
Wait, the Civil War? Are you serious?
Completely serious. Before the 1860s, bodies were generally washed, shrouded, and buried quickly by the family in a simple wooden pine box.
Okay, so a very natural process.
Very natural. But during the Civil War, there was this sudden, massive need to transport casualties over long distances via train back to their families in the North or the South.
Oh, I see, because it would take days.
Exactly. And ice cooling was super inefficient for those long journeys. So field surgeons started using chemical preservatives to temporarily halt decomposition, just long enough for a body to survive a multi-day train ride.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, and then when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, his body was embalmed and taken on a multi-city train tour so the public could mourn.
Oh, wow. So that was like a huge public display of embalming.
Precisely. That highly publicized event essentially served as a national advertisement for the procedure.
That is fascinating.
So what began as a wartime logistical necessity slowly morphed over the next century into an expected commercialized aesthetic standard?
We normalized it.
Right. We confused a temporary preservation technique with a necessary ritual of respect.
So we took a 19th century wartime stopgap and built a multi-billion-dollar, highly toxic modern industry around it.
That's exactly what happened.
I want you, the listener, to really visualize the scale of this for a second. Think about the staggering volume of materials buried globally every single year.
It's immense.
We are pouring enough concrete into the ground annually to build massive highway systems. We are burying enough steel to construct modern bridges.
Yep.
When you drive past the manicured, bright green lawns of a traditional cemetery, you are looking at an illusion.
A total illusion.
Beneath the surface, it is rows and rows of concrete bunkers. Metal boxes inside concrete boxes, slowly corroding.
Right.
And the green burial alternative, by stark contrast, completely eliminates these interventions.
Completely.
It emphasizes natural decomposition. It removes the embalming chemicals entirely or mandates the use of strictly non-toxic plant-based alternatives.
Yeah, and the mechanism of that natural decomposition is incredibly efficient if we simply allow it to happen.
How does it work exactly?
Well, in a green burial, the goal is to optimize the conditions for the local soil microbiome.
Okay.
By burying the body closer to the surface, often at a depth of about 3 to 4 feet, rather than the traditional 6 feet, the body remains in the nutrient-dense, highly active topsoil layer.
Oh, interesting. So the 6 feet under thing isn't actually good for decomposition.
No, at 6 feet, there's very little microbial action. But at 3 to 4 feet, that layer is rich in oxygen, aerobic bacteria, nematodes, and fungi.
Alive.
Highly alive. And without the chemical barrier of formaldehyde and without the physical barrier of steel and concrete, these natural microorganisms quickly and safely break down the organic matter.
That makes perfect sense.
The core philosophy here is not just about doing less harm by avoiding toxic leaks. It is about actively returning biological nutrients to the earth.
I love that.
It is allowing a natural cycle to complete itself, preserving the biological integrity of the land for future generations, rather than creating an underground hazardous waste site.
Let's shift to the logistics of removing all that steel, concrete, and chemical processing. Because there's an economic angle here that is really interesting.
Oh, definitely.
Usually when we hear the words eco-friendly or sustainable, whether we are looking at organic produce, sustainable clothing lines, or electric vehicles, we expect to pay a significant premium.
Right, the classic eco-tax.
Exactly. There is an accepted eco-tax built into our consumer culture.
Mm.
But the data on green burials points to a massive cost reduction.
It really does.
Traditional funerals are vastly expensive, largely because of the required hardware. So returning to basics actually reduces the financial burden on families.
Substantially.
How does an industry that relies so heavily on upselling expensive products allow a cheaper, simpler alternative to gain traction? I mean, is this just a rare anomaly in the sustainability movement?
It is. It's one of the few areas where environmental sustainability perfectly and naturally overlaps with financial accessibility.
Which is so rare.
Very rare. We have to look at the economics of the modern funeral industry to understand why. The traditional model relies on compounding costs.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, you are paying for the chemical preparation of the body. You are paying a premium for a casket made of mahogany or heavy-gauge steel, often sold on the promise of protection from the elements, which, as we've established, is a temporary illusion.
Right, it's going to rust anyway.
Exactly. Furthermore, nearly all conventional cemeteries mandate the purchase of a concrete vault or grave liner.
Yes, the concrete bunker. Why is that mandated?
The stated reason to the consumer is often that it protects the casket, but the functional, operational reason the cemetery requires it is to prevent the ground from settling.
Wait, what?
Yeah, they want a perfectly flat lawn so they can easily run heavy riding mowers over the graves without the machines tipping into depressions.
Wait, so the concrete vault, the thing that takes massive amounts of carbon to produce and essentially turns the cemetery into an underground parking garage, is largely mandated just to make lawn care easier.
That's the primary reason, yes.
That is infuriating. It has nothing to do with public health or sanitation.
Public health is often cited, but there is no scientific basis for requiring a concrete vault to protect public health from a naturally decomposing body.
Wow.
It is purely about landscape architecture and maintenance efficiency,
That is mind-blowing.
isn't it? So, by choosing a green burial, you strip away those commercialized mandates. You aren't inventing a new, expensive green technology to solve an environmental problem.
Right, you don't have to buy a Tesla casket.
Exactly. You are simply removing the costly, harmful interventions that caused the problem in the first place.
Yeah.
You eliminate the vault. You eliminate the embalming. You replace the heavy metal or mahogany with entirely biodegradable materials.
Let's talk about those materials, actually, because the aesthetic shift is profound.
It really is beautiful.
We're talking about caskets woven from willow, wicker, or bamboo.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about simple, untreated pine boxes constructed without metal nails or toxic glues. Or, even simpler, returning to one of the oldest human practices, wrapping the body in a shroud made of natural, biodegradable fabrics like cotton, linen, or wool.
Yeah.
There was something deeply resonant about the image of a woven willow casket. It doesn't look manufactured to resist the environment. It looks like it grew out of it.
The materials are critical to the biological mechanism we discussed earlier, but they also carry a significant psychological weight.
How so?
Well, a traditional high-gloss steel casket communicates a hard, impermeable barrier between the living and the dead, and between the dead and the earth.
Like a shield.
Right.
Okay.
But a shroud or a wicker carrier communicates permeability and integration. You are part of the environment.
I love that.
However, removing the traditional hardware also means removing the traditional markers.
Ah, right, the headstones.
Exactly. If we are avoiding the environmental impact of mining, polishing, and hauling massive slabs of granite to serve as headstones, we encounter a logistical hurdle.
Because you still need to know where someone is.
Exactly. How do families actually locate their loved ones in a natural environment decades later? This is where the movement has integrated a fascinating technological solution.
Yeah, the mapping technology is incredible.
It is.
If you were in a natural burial ground, essentially a forest or a wild meadow,
Yeah.
you can't rely on a grid of stone monuments. Instead, these sites are utilizing precise GPS coordinates and natural landmarks for documentation.
Right.
But I have to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
We're talking about relying on satellites orbiting the Earth and digital databases maintained on servers to mark a grave.
Yes.
What happens in 100 years? A granite headstone, for all its environmental flaws, is a physical, undeniable proof of existence that can last for centuries. If the digital grid goes down or the company maintaining the database goes bankrupt, doesn't a family lose that specific location forever?
That is the most common and honestly the most understandable apprehension regarding natural burial.
Yeah, it feels risky.
We are biologically and culturally hardwired to desire physical totems, a permanent locus for memory.
Exactly.
But the reliance on GPS in these conservation spaces is far more robust than, say, a simple app on your smartphone.
Okay, so how does it work?
We are talking about real-time kinematic positioning, or RTK GPS.
RTK GPS.
Right, which can pinpoint a location on the Earth down to the centimeter.
Wow, down to the centimeter.
Yes. Furthermore, these coordinates are legally recorded in public land surveys and deeds,
Oh,
so it deeply integrates the location into the permanent legal record of the land itself, independent of any single private database.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better.
And to address the fear of technological failure, reputable green cemeteries use a multi-layered approach. They don't just rely on digital coordinates.
What else do they use?
They triangulate graves using permanent natural features,
Like what?
like a specific ancient oak tree, or a permanent rock outcropping, or a geological ridge.
So it's a synthesis of high technology and primal navigation.
Beautifully said. Yes.
I want you to imagine the physical experience of that.
It's very different.
Right. Imagine navigating a serene, dense forest. You are looking at a coordinate system, perhaps referencing a map that guides you past a specific stream, listening to the crunch of leaves underfoot, taking a deeply intentional nature walk to visit a loved one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, contrast that with the physical experience of a traditional cemetery. You drive your car through wrought iron gates, park on a paved asphalt road, and walk down a perfectly sterile, manicured grid of identical granite blocks.
It's night and day.
It really is. It's an entirely different spatial and psychological relationship with the dead.
It fundamentally changes our perception of what a memorial space should be. A traditional cemetery is highly curated, static, and fundamentally separate from the broader ecosystem.
Yeah.
It is an area of land that has been permanently removed from the natural biological cycle.
Right, because of all the concrete and steel.
Exactly. And it requires massive ongoing inputs of energy, water, fertilizers, and herbicides to keep nature at bay and maintain that illusion of a permanent, unchanging lawn.
It's almost fighting nature constantly.
It is. It is, ecologically speaking, a dead zone.
Wow.
The green burial movement, however, flips that paradigm. It invites nature in. These sites ditch the manicured lawns in favor of restoring native vegetation, planting wildflowers, and allowing forests to regenerate.
So it's actually healing the land.
Exactly. The cemetery ceases to be a static museum of monuments and becomes a dynamic, living nature preserve.
It's the difference between visiting a warehouse of the dead and walking through a living, breathing national park.
That's a great way to put it.
And this goes beyond just aesthetics. There's a direct, aggressive mechanism of environmental conservation happening here.
Absolutely.
Some of these green cemeteries operate as dedicated, legally protected conservation areas.
Right, conservation burial grounds.
Yes. The burial fees that families pay are actively used to purchase land, maintain natural habitats, remove invasive species, and protect local watersheds.
It's a brilliant model.
It really is. This entirely changes the conversation around end-of-life planning. How does knowing your final arrangements are actively funding the preservation of a forest change the way we view things like writing a will or buying life insurance or conceptualizing our legacy?
It introduces the incredibly powerful concept of an active legacy.
Active legacy, I like that.
Right. Because historically, legacy has been defined by static objects left behind. You know, a financial inheritance, an endowed building, a marble statue.
Stuff that just sits there.
Exactly. But in a conservation burial model, the financial mechanics of death care are entirely repurposed.
How so?
Instead of spending thousands of dollars on a concrete vault that will sit uselessly underground, those exact same funds are channeled into a land trust.
Oh, wow.
They are purchasing conservation easements.
What are those?
They're legally binding agreements that protect that specific parcel of land from commercial development, logging, or subdivision in perpetuity.
So it can never be touched.
Never. For someone who has spent their life passionate about environmental causes, this provides a profound psychological peace.
I can imagine.
Your body is biologically nourishing the soil, while the financial capital generated by your death is legally protecting the forest above it.
That is so powerful.
Your death becomes a literal and financial mechanism for sustaining ongoing life.
Think about your own deeply held values right now as you're listening to this.
Really think about it.
How would it feel to know that your final resting place wasn't just a tiny rented rectangle of dirt, but was simultaneously acting as a permanent sanctuary for native flora and fauna?
Mm-hmm.
That a herd of deer might migrate across your site, or a rare endangered wildflower might take root there, all because the fees associated with your burial permanently shielded that acre of land from becoming a strip mall or a housing development.
It's incredible.
It creates a legacy of environmental responsibility that extends far beyond your own lifespan.
And, you know, the broader societal impact of this cannot be overstated.
Right.
When a cemetery operates as a land trust, it transforms from a fenced-off zone of quiet mourning into a vital community asset.
Because people can actually use it.
Exactly. It becomes a green space where the public might hike, birdwatch, or study local ecology. It breaks down the physical walls we have built around the concept of death.
It brings death back into life.
Yes. integrating the dead back into the daily, joyous, and recreational lives of the community.
Which perfectly brings us to the psychological shift happening beneath the surface of this movement.
It's a huge shift.
Because changing the physical space of a cemetery from a static grid of headstones to a dynamic, living forest mirrors a much deeper structural rewiring of how families process grief.
Right.
We live in a society that aggressively outsources almost everything uncomfortable.
We do. We outsource everything.
We outsource our food production to industrial farms. We outsource our waste management. And over the last century, we have almost entirely outsourced death.
We have. And the history of that outsourcing is vital to understanding our current cultural psychology.
What does that history look like?
Prior to the 20th century, the family home was the center of death care.
Really? The home?
Yes. When someone died, the family washed the body, dressed them, and laid them out in the front room of the house.
Wow.
Which, by the way, was historically called the death parlor.
The death parlor? I've never heard that.
Yeah. The community came to the home to mourn. But with the rise of the modern funeral industry, the process was professionalized and moved out of the home.
Okay, so that's where the shift happened.
Right. The death parlor was actually rebranded by interior designers as the living room.
Shut up. Is that really where the term living room comes from?
That is exactly where it comes from. Ladies' Home Journal pushed the term to rebrand the room once death moved out of the house.
That is wild.
And the care of the dead was transferred to the funeral parlor. So death became highly choreographed by professionals. The body is now whisked away immediately, prepared behind closed doors with chemicals and cosmetics, and presented almost like a wax figure.
It is a sanitized, curated presentation.
Highly curated.
The green burial movement strips all of that away, offering what the literature describes as an unembellished grieving process.
Yes, unembellished is the perfect word.
In these natural burials, families and friends are highly encouraged to participate hands-on.
Very hands-on.
They might be the ones to wash and shroud the body. They might physically carry the woven casket through the woods. They might take up shovels and physically return the earth to the grave themselves.
Right.
But I have to ask, isn't that incredibly traumatic?
It's a valid concern.
Because if you are already reeling from the loss of a loved one, doesn't the physical exertion of lowering their body into the ground make the initial shock of grief much harder?
It seems like it would.
Yeah. Why would a family choose to take on that physical burden when professionals offer to handle it smoothly and quietly?
It is a vital question, and it touches on the core mechanics of human psychology and grief processing.
Okay.
When death is hidden away, heavily processed, and managed entirely by strangers in suits, it creates a severe psychological disconnect.
A disconnect between what happened and what you're seeing.
Right. The sanitized presentation can make the reality of the loss feel surreal, abstract, or even deniable to the grieving mind.
Like they're just asleep.
Exactly. When a community takes back that physical responsibility, when they feel the actual physical weight of the casket in their hands, when they hear the sound of the earth hitting the shroud, when they engage their muscles to shovel the dirt, it is intensely visceral.
You must be.
It is absolutely confronting. But psychologically, kinesthetic action breaks through the numbness of grief.
Oh, wow. Kinesthetic action.
Yes. The physical exertion acts as a grounding mechanism. It forces the brain to process the undeniable reality of the transition.
That makes a lot of sense.
Psychologists who study this hands-on approach note that while the initial moments at the graveside might be more visibly emotional, the long-term path to closure is often much healthier.
It's like ripping the Band-Aid off instead of peeling it slowly.
In a way, yes. It replaces the passive experience of watching a machine lower a box from a distance with an active communal ritual of returning a loved one to the earth.
It completely changes the power dynamic.
It really does.
I think about traditional funerals I've attended. You sit passively in a pew. You listen to an officiant you may barely know. You drive in a procession to the graveside. You stand behind a velvet rope and watch a mechanical lowering device. And then everyone is ushered away to a reception before the dirt is even moved.
Right, you're just a spectator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The personalization aspect of the green burial dismantles that rigid framework.
Entirely.
It offers the flexibility to have deeply unique outdoor services, entirely free from traditional constraints. It feels like taking the steering wheel back from an industry that has dictated exactly how, when, and where we're supposed to say goodbye.
Taking the steering wheel back is empowering, but it also demands a high level of responsibility and foresight.
That's true. It's not just a free-for-all.
No, not at all. Without the rigid framework of a traditional funeral director managing every legal and logistical detail, families must be prepared. Education and advanced planning are absolutely vital in this space.
You can't just wing it.
You cannot simply decide on a whim to bypass the traditional system without understanding the legal requirements for transportation, the specific zoning laws of local natural burial grounds, and all the necessary paperwork.
That is a crucial point. If you suddenly pass away and you haven't laid any groundwork, your family is going to be in crisis mode.
Total crisis mode.
If you've just casually mentioned at dinner once, hey, don't call the funeral director, just wrap me in a linen sheet and bury me in the woods, that is going to cause absolute panic.
Oh, absolutely. They won't know what to do.
There are municipal laws, transportation permits, and death certificates to manage. The resources surrounding this movement emphasize the need for rigorous documentation.
Yes, documentation is key.
Organizations and guides, like the Funeral Program Site and various green burial councils, provide essential templates and assistance to demystify this process.
Those resources act as the bridge between the beautiful philosophy of returning to nature and the strict legal realities of modern society.
Right, because the law still applies.
Exactly. A proactive approach is non-negotiable. By explicitly outlining your wishes, securing a plot in a certified conservation cemetery, and legally designating an agent to carry out your end-of-life plan, you provide immense peace of mind to your family.
You're giving them a roadmap.
You are. You remove the burden of guesswork during their most vulnerable moments. It allows the family to bypass the stress of navigating unfamiliar zoning laws and instead focus entirely on the profound emotional and spiritual experience of the natural burial ritual itself.
It requires us to have the uncomfortable conversations while we are still healthy.
It does. It really does.
It demands a complete societal reevaluation of mortality. When we distill everything we've explored today, the picture is incredibly clear. Green burial is not just a niche environmental statement for people who like to hike.
No, it's so much bigger than that.
It is a massive holistic movement. It combines elegant simplicity, undeniable financial accessibility, highly effective land conservation, and a profoundly authentic emotional reconnection with the natural cycles of life and death.
It is a movement that asks us to fundamentally reframe our perspective.
How so?
It challenges us to look at the end of human life not as a medical failure that needs to be cosmetically hidden and chemically preserved, but as a deeply natural biological reality that can be beautifully integrated into the ongoing health and survival of the planet.
That is beautifully put. I want to leave you, our listeners, with a final thought, something to really mull over as you go about your day.
Yeah, this is a big one.
If green burials and conservation cemeteries continue to gain traction, if they outgrow their current status as an alternative and become the dominant societal standard over the next century, how might this permanently alter our global geography?
All right, think about the maps.
Think about the way we organize our landscapes. Will the stark historical divide we currently maintain between spaces for the living, our bustling cities, our expanding suburbs, and spaces for the dead, our walled-off, silent cemeteries, entirely dissolve?
It's a fascinating possibility.
Could the peripheries of our urban centers transform into massive, thriving, protected greenbelt nature reserves, funded entirely by our own final return to the earth?
It would change everything.
Imagine a future where the exact places we lay our ancestors to rest are the very same vibrant living forests we hike through, where we teach our children about ecology, and where we interact joyfully with nature every single day.
It presents a visionary integration of human memory and ecological survival, where the dead actively sustain the living environment indefinitely.
It truly changes everything about how we look at the end of the road. Thank you for bringing your curiosity today, for challenging your assumptions, and for taking this deep dive with us. Until next time.